So we're in the middle of a series called Spot Remover, and we're talking about those things that might rob us of God's best. And not necessarily sins in their own right, but the minute they rob us of God's best, then it becomes sin in our lives because it robs us of everything God has in mind for us. And so we're not talking about sin per se, but as much as things that attack us and keep us, again, from everything that we should be and the potential we have in God. And the word this week is anger, which is very interesting because, man, there's a lot of anger in our world, I believe. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail as we go along. At the same time, the world's both a good and a bad place. It really is. It's just interesting. And I don't know about you, but I'm absolutely amazed at how many people have actually stepped in COVID-19 and just made a difference. And they've done all kinds of good in our world. And, you know, people with one manufacturing gift use that gift, or some company, they do it for something else. And they're making provision, and they're doing all kinds of great things. They just, you know, they just work hard, and they're trying to help with frontline people, and they're trying to make life better. I heard of one company that has a big fleet of transports, and they offered 30 of them for free to transport any medical issue anywhere in Ontario. And I thought, that sounds right. That's how it should be. Because there's a lot of good in our world. And a place like right now, we're in the middle of this pandemic, that really shows and it comes to light. And we're really grateful for all of that. The problem is we also have some bad in our world. And a lot of that's created by anger. And so we talked for a while, and we did about 11 weeks on life in the fast lane. And you can't help but talk about the highways of Toronto when you do that. And there's a lot of road rage. There's a lot of people angry when they're driving, and then I've done way too much marriage counseling in my life, and there's just a lot of anger. So many couples come just so angry at each other. The people they're supposed to love, anger is not uncommon in our world at all. And I have to confess, and I wish this wasn't true, but I've been in leadership a long time, and I've dealt with way too many moments of anger in the church as well, where people wanted it their way, and they were just willing to do whatever it took to get that, even if it wasn't particularly Christian. And so in spite of the religiosity and the spirituality of our world, we actually live in this world where there's a lot of anger that goes on. And so we just want to address this a little bit. I love what Ephesians says. Ephesians says, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down where you're still angry. We'll come back to that. I was watching a program the other day on television, just a comedy really, but in it there was a serious moment as this man was arguing about the difference, and he had just justifiable anger, and he had this argument about which was worse, whether it was war or whether it was hell. And he actually asked a minister, a priest, he said, why do people go to hell? And he said, well, the priest said, well, because they're sinners. They're not following God. And he said, that's right. And that's why war is worse, because the people who go to hell deserve to go to, they choose not to choose God. And he said, but the people in war, all kinds of innocent people are destroyed and hurt and wounded. And he was angry. He was angry. There was an anger there. And so Ephesians is telling us that anger is not all wrong. There's a justifiable anger that actually is right, and righteous anger that's okay. But there's the other anger that actually destroys us. Louis Giglio says, I didn't know if I pronounced it Giglio, sorry, I got that right. He says, anger is not wrong, but if anger is uncontrolled, stuff misplaced, or given vent, then that anger can do harm. So we don't want to rule out all anger as if it's a terrible thing, because it's not. Let's be angry about injustices. Let's be angry about the devastation that this virus has done, and let's do everything we can to help people and help ourselves to overcome whatever we can do, whatever we can add, and whatever value we can add. Let's do that. The problem is that much anger is the kind that hurts us. I've called it fits. So people have fits of anger. We actually describe it that way. And there are all kinds of reasons for it. There's all kinds of reasons for it. So sometimes we get angry when there's a sense of injustice, or our feelings get hurt, or we've been corrected, or we feel like we've been rejected, or we feel like we've been attacked, or we feel like we're put in a corner. It's just amazing how angry people can get. During a period in my life as a boy, we lived in the country. We had a big barn. It was called an L-shaped barn. It was a big barn running, well, do this, a big barn running this way, a big barn running this way. And in the middle of that L was a manure pile. And I was out one day walking, and I saw a groundhog on the manure pile, and I went to chase him, and I got him quartered in the L of the barn, right in that corner between those two pieces. And it was amazing. He stood on his hind legs and bared his teeth, and I realized if I got any closer, I might lose pieces of my leg. He was so angry at being trapped there. And a lot of people are like that. They get trapped at some moment, and it can happen any time. Giglio went on to say this. He said that anger could happen any time we feel betrayed, we feel overlooked, we feel slighted, we feel belittled, we want something or we hope for something, we didn't get what we wanted, and now we're angry, and it just happens on a regular basis. We feel angry when we don't get our own way. We feel angry when we have an inflated ego even, and sometimes we feel slighted or not listened to. We just can feel that. You're not listening. See, I remember a person sat in my office, one of our pastors actually. We'd made a decision at the national office about how we were doing missions, and he didn't like the decision. And he came and he argued with me for about 45 minutes. I just listened to him, and when he was all done, I basically said, "I'm sorry, we're not going to do it your way." And he said to me, "You're not listening to me." I said, "I am listening to you. Let me say to you in a short version what you said." I didn't say the short version part. I said, "Let me say to you what you said." And I summarized what he said. I said, "Do I have that right?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I am listening to you. What I'm not doing is agreeing with you. We have a problem. We have to fix it. And you don't like the solution. And I don't know if the solution is great either. But we can't leave it the way it is. And so we're going to try this." And so people get angry when they don't get their own way or their opinion isn't always listened to. Almost all conflict in a local church, almost all conflict in any situation comes based on opinion. And the problem with opinion anger is that there's only 2 or 3 realities in opinion. Either you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and you're wrong, or we're both wrong. It's impossible if we have a different view to be both right. And so anger comes, and we have these reasons for this anger. Sometimes we can get angry if our safety is infected or somebody else's safety is infected. And so that's why, you don't want to get too close to mama bears with their children, because they really guard them. And I think that's true in life as well. And that's a good anger. That's not a bad anger. But whenever we let it rule in us, because it becomes like a fit in us. And sometimes it's outspoken and sometimes it's passive, but it's still there, and it rules and it dominates in our lives. Benjamin Franklin said this: "Anger is never without a reason, but seldom with a good one." And then those are the reasons, but then there's this kind of rationale for anger that people have as well. And so anger that is felt over something that is a reflection of us more than other people. It often is not about them at all. It's really about us. It's what's in our heart. It's what we've harbored there. It's we are too fragile, or we're too easily hurt, and sometimes the other person doesn't even know it's happened. I know people that are hurt all the time, and they get angry about it. And I think that's almost an issue of pride, because you'd have to be prideful to think that many people were going out of the way to hurt you. And so anger becomes this dominant force in someone's life, and we worry about that. And so much of the anger in our world is based on that. And they rationalize it because it's me, and so I must be important, and I'm important enough that if you're not with me, then you must be against me. And then sometimes there's anger that's actually justified. It's actually good anger, but the response is inappropriate. It doesn't work. It overcomes. And then when that happens, then it becomes what we call chronic anger. Chronic anger, where people are angry all the time. And I know people that are like that. You can hardly be near them. They're always angry about something, it appears. And again, big or small, there's an edge all the time, and you know people like that. Maybe you struggle with that. That's why we're sharing this message. And it can be big or small, but it's there. And sometimes we've learned to cover it up because we're really good at it. We learn to cover the anger up, you see, and so we don't let them ever see the pencil break. We learn how to do that, and we say the right words. But inside, there's this kind of seething that goes on in big or small portions. William Barclay calls that instant insanity. Instant insanity. And so we have this anger that happens, and so when the anger happens, what do we do? Again, I've done a lot of marriage. I don't do it anymore. I'm just too old, and it takes too many hours, and I don't have the hours or the location or any of those things. I see so many couples just angry with each other, and I have this list of things that people do when they're angry. And I just thought I would share it with you today just because it's so common. By the way, in this whole list, there's only one thing that actually works, and it's rarely picked. I actually will give this list to couples, and I'll say, I want you to check off what you're like, and I want you to check off what your spouse is like, but please don't share it with each other. Bring it to me, and we'll talk about it when we're together, because if I let them share it together, they might blow up and make it much worse, because they're already fighting anyway, and the anger is already present anyway. So here they are: blame themselves and others, or you yell, or you withdraw, physical and emotional, or you use silence as a weapon, or you negotiate, or you placate, you speak down or try to reason without reasoning, or you give in only on the outside, or you change the subject, which is a form of avoidance, or you attack, verbal or sometimes even physical, or you get defensive. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. And by the way, even if it is my fault, you're not perfect either. Or we cry, a physical response, or we use put-downs and belittle people, or we use humor, another form of avoidance, or we store it up, and we have this moment, then all of a sudden later, at some moment, it blows up, and we get angry, and it really blows up then, and we get emotional, we get unreasonable, and we argue verbally, and we can't let it go until we have that person understand how right we were on that point, even if the argument's long over. And the only word in there that even works is negotiate, and it is seldom done in couples where anger and storms are happening. Anger is seldom calm, and it is usually a storm brewing. Now, you know lots of people with anger. I've had moments of anger in my own life. I'm sure you have as well. I remember a friend of mine saying to me, I'm so glad you became a believer because you're not angry like you used to be. I'm not sure why I was angry as a teenager, but I was. And so this instant insanity ruled my life, and I'm so glad that Christ came, and I still have moments of anger, but I know where to go with it now. Because you see, here are the facts. Here are the facts. The facts are that anger actually hurts us. Anger hurts us often more than other people. It hurts us in our relationship with ourselves. It hurts our relationship with other people. It hurts our relationship with God. We can actually get angry at God when things don't go our way. Anger just doesn't get... When it's hurtful and we see it as hurtful, it's harder to resolve. Anger rarely makes us a victor, but it will often make us a victim. I remember a time when I was serving in the district, and one of my workers got really anxious and got upset, and this is not really about anger, but he was really upset. We had a problem, and so it was in another church, and he called me, and I was on a day off, and I spent hours on it with him, and in the middle of it all, I finally this started early in the morning, or 8 in the morning or so, and around noon hour, I finally said, by the way, where's the pastor in all of this? So he didn't know. And so I called his church, and I discovered the pastor was also on a day off, and he was out playing golf. And we were fussing and fretting over stuff that were his problem, and he was out playing golf because he didn't even know, didn't even care. It was one of my workers that made it an issue. And sometimes anger is like that. We can be hurt and we can be angry, and the person we're angry with or was hurt us doesn't even know. They're out playing golf or they're doing something else, and they're not even aware. And the truth is, we need to learn to forgive people, even those who are not sorry for their actions. Holding on to the anger only hurts us and not them. And then the real issue, of course, is that anger not only hurts us, but it really hurts others. It leads to jealousy and accusations and false reports that are based on feelings, not reality. It can even lead to character assassination. And sometimes it's passive. We sort of sit back as if it's not really there. But it's really passive-aggressive, and it's just waiting for a moment to engage. Just waiting for a moment to let the bomb go off. Have you ever noticed that families that are angry have a tendency to compare and compete and rarely enjoy, celebrate, or affirm? So people who are angry hurt others. Listen, this is a great quote. Speak when you are angry and you'll make the best speech you will ever regret. Isn't that profound? Speak when you're angry and you'll make the best speech you will ever regret. And the other reality is that anger is often scattered. It's kind of just goes everywhere. It's not always discriminate. It's not always aimed. It could be aimed at one person, but it is a tendency to get angry around the place. And sometimes it's focused and it's scattered. Have you ever known somebody that had a really bad day at work and they get really angry and really upset and they don't say a word, and then they come home and take it out on their wife and kids or their husband and kids? Happens all the time. Happens all the time. It gets scattered in various places that are almost not even related to the issue. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. Anger is not a good thing, folks. It's just so destructive. And I'm sure that most of us in this church are Christians and we don't have a big problem with it. And I know I may be talking to the few or to the minor, but I do want us to talk about it because this is a serious problem in our world. And there's so many protests and so much anger and so much animosity out there. I remember seeing a sign it was about a company that people were on strike. And I'm not promoting the company or the strike. I'm just reporting. And there were big placards as people were marching. Kill, and they named the company. Kill the company. Kill the company. And I'm thinking, as I drove by, I thought, well, if you killed the company, you wouldn't have a job. And I thought that was anger overtaken. And so injustices need to be righted, and things have to be done right. And I'm not debating or even talking about strikes or unions or any of that stuff. I'm not even going there. I just want to make the point that sometimes anger is irrational. And we all pay the price for that. And sometimes, I love this picture in a way, and I hate it at the same time. Choices made in anger cannot be undone. There's nowhere to land, folks. There's nowhere to land. And anger invites a response. And this happens a lot. And so you deal with somebody who's angry and they take it out, and the next thing you know, the person who's the victim gets angry back. It's not easy all the time. If you are in a place where there's anger shown and you become the victim of that anger, it's not always easy to take that and be gracious and kind and thoughtful and back. And I know the Bible says a soft answer turns away wrath. It does say that. And as much as lies within us, we're supposed to live peaceably with all people. And I understand it says that too. But I also watch people who really love God who get under the gun as people are angry with them, and they are angry back. And then everybody loses. See, the problem with anger is there's no win-lose. It's both lose-lose. There's no win-lose. And one author said this: anger is a feeling that makes your mouth work faster than your mind. And that doesn't even sound kind, but in a way it's true. And so when it is in dramatic terms, it invites a response, which is not very good. Well, this is all kind of bad news. I don't even like speaking these kind of messages, but I just think it's true, and we need to address the real issues in the church, and we need to talk about what that looks like. And so let's get to the good stuff. Let's talk about fixing it. So all those anger things, we have ways to fix it as believers. We're children of God. And sometimes anger can be instantaneous, and sometimes the fix takes a little longer. But I want to start with an incredible and important truth, and that's this: that God can help us. God actually has wrath of his own. I'm sure you know that. Jesus had wrath of his own, but it was righteous indignation. It was always righteous. God never sins. God never rages. God's never anything but holy and righteous. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of righteous anger in our own lives. We can actually have that. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. God can't be anything but holy and righteous. And yet at the same time, he gets angry at injustices. He gets angry at sin and the impact of sin. And that's why he sent Christ, so that we could be redeemed from the sin and the penalty of that, and we could be redeemed from anger, which robs us of God's best. So let's go back to Ephesians that we talked about a little bit earlier, and we'll complete the verse a little bit more. It says this: in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. And so what God, first of all, says to us is that anger is justified. It's justified. Anger is justified. I remember pastoring one church, and it's hard to even admit this, but there were some cliques in the church, and there were people that just shut other people out, and it was so unhealthy. And I remember the clique wanting me to be part of the clique and resisting that, and they actually offered me, all expenses paid, for my wife and my children, a free trip to Florida. And I just knew that if I had done that, then I would have paid a huge price for that, and I would have been owned by them to a large degree. And so we had a brand new family in our church that were poor, like really poor, just came to Jesus, and they had never been on vacation and drive an old clunk of a car and not a great job. And I actually suggested that they take that family instead of my family, and they got very upset with me, and it took a little while to build some bridges. And I had to examine the anger of my own heart at this moment, because I got angry at them. And I must confess, I felt that my anger was justified in a way, because I was arguing for the good of the kingdom and the good of the community. And I think God has that kind of anger. I hope it was justified. I believe it was. But then there's the other kind we've already talked about. It's that harmful anger. It's that anger that robs us of the best of us and everybody else. And the Bible has a number of words that describes this kind of anger. The Bible calls it turbulent commotion and boiling agitation and passion boiling up and irritation, exasperation, and bitterment, and a settled habit of the mind and continually aroused. It's all in different words in the Greek, but that's the kind of anger that's being talked about. If you take the Greek words for anger and look at them, that's what they mean. And God says, listen, I'm not going to give you 25 solutions. But I'm going to give you a couple that actually work. I'm going to give you some suggestions for how to deal with your anger because I want to help you overcome the anger. And God says to us through Paul in Ephesians, he says, listen, give it time. Don't let the sun go down in your wrath. Don't let the sun go down in your anger, ever. In other words, keep it really short. Keep it short. So once the anger has happened, don't let it brood. Don't let it go on and on and on. Because the longer it broods, the more harmful it gets. The longer you harbor it, the more painful it becomes. And God says, no, I don't want you to do that through Paul. He says, listen, don't let the sun go down in your wrath. I kind of like cartoons, and I did enjoy this one a little bit. Here's the daughter of Hagar and Helga. He says, you and Daddy look tired this morning. We should be. We stayed up all night. And why would that be? When we married, we promised each other we'd never go to bed mad. So they didn't have the right solution. They didn't solve the problem. They just stayed awake all night and they're still mad the next day. That's not what God is suggesting at all. What God is suggesting is by bedtime, let the anger dissipate. If you have to take it to God, you take it to God. You have to take it to the person, you take it to the person. I've had interactions with people that are not necessarily about anger, but I just felt uncomfortable about them. I have a little practice. I've done it for years now. If I ever have an interaction with anybody in a day and I lose sleep over it that night, I may not be angry at all, but I'm uncomfortable with what happened. I go the next day to that person and I don't say to them, you dirty, rotten dog, look what you did, or you really hurt me. I don't say that. I say, listen, yesterday when we talked, I just felt uncomfortable at the end of it. I wonder if we could talk about that. If I've done anything wrong, can we talk about that? We can have a conversation about that. Because I don't want any harboring to go on for a long time because I know it will hurt them, but I know it will hurt me even more because if I don't forgive, then it really hurts me as much as or maybe more, in fact, more than them. So Ephesians gives us a little hint. He says this, don't harbor it for a long time. Don't let that happen. And then James picks it up, and James says this, my dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Now, he talks about the evil planted in us, and Paul talks about giving place to the devil. It just means that we give space in our lives for things that are not godly to take place in our lives, and God doesn't want us to have that. Paul doesn't want that. James doesn't want that. James is the brother of Jesus, and he comes and says, listen, we can be like Jesus. And one of the ways we do that is we practice being slow to anger. He's not arguing against not having any anger either. Just be really slow. Like don't be hot-tempered. Don't be really quick. James doesn't give us any excuse for any anger that is hot. He actually talks us about not having words that are regretted or feelings that are broken. He actually talks us to be calm as much as we can. And I know we can't do that always on our own. We can't do that without help. And that's why it's so important we understand that not only is God for us, God with us, but God is actually for us. See, anger is often centered on ourselves. When we understand that God is for us, then we begin to center our lives on Him. And we center our lives on Him, that we know that He is on our side. And we know that we don't have to fight every battle ourselves. We know that He's our God and He's in charge. And it's okay, and we could actually learn to forgive in a new way. We forgive as He forgave. There was a lot to be forgiven, and Jesus gladly did, and we can't do that without God's help. But God can actually help us learn to forgive others and step outside of the anger. And when that happens, we become slow to anger. And God has an ability to right wrongs one way or the other, either here or there. And we may never see them in this life entirely. But we know this, that the forgiveness of God and the righteousness of God, He impacts life, yours and mine. And we can learn to rest in Him and learn to be slower to anger and ultimately slow to anger. And the longer we serve Him and the closer we are to God, the more we become like Him and the less anger rules in our lives. In Giglio, I've quoted him 3 times because he really had a good chapter I read on anger among many other sources as well. Here's what he said. What God did for us is greater than what anyone could do against us. And let's put our lives in God's hands, and let's understand that God's in charge. And then finally, and this is really important as well, God can actually change us. He can undo the anger that has hurt us. He can undo, He can hit the undo button in our lives. He can just do that. And we don't have to avenge anymore. We don't have to get more angry or more bitter, which only makes the problem bigger and longer. We realize we can't change everything. We can't change everybody, but we can change ourselves, and we can let God change us. There's some things we can't do. But we can be honest and admit we have issues of anger. We can throw ourselves in God's mercy and ask for His forgiveness. We can ask for His peace in the midst of the battle. We can ask for His help so His likeness can shine through us. And God never gives us an option that's not a possibility. God gives us the possibility that we can actually be changed. We can choose God over ourselves. We can listen and surrender and learn His grace in us and through us to others. It is an incredible moment of surrender. And with God's help, we can forgive, even if it's unjustified that comes against us. We can forgive. Forgiveness doesn't talk about some imagined hurt. Forgiveness actually talks about somebody deliberately trying to hurt us, and we still forgive them rather than responding and becoming like them. In our response to them, we become just like them. We don't want to do that. We want to be like God. And so we let forgiveness rule and reign in our heart. I thought I'd conclude today with telling you an old story. It's early when I was just a young man, before I was even married. I remember my very first car. It was a Morris Minor 1000. This one looks really good. And my car looked just like that, except it was beat up and the paint was faded and it was quite a bit older. And it was a Morris Minor 1000, 1960, I think. Anyway, my dad didn't want me to drive his car, and he only had one, and he used it for work. And so I just knew if I was going to drive, I had to buy a car. And so I was working, and I went out and I saw this sign on a car, and I knew this kid in high school. He and I had been in some clubs together, and I counted him a friend. We spent some time together, and so I saw this for sale sign in this Morris Minor 1000, and I stopped to see it, and who should come out of the door but this guy that I knew. He was a friend. I counted him a friend, and I really liked the car, and I liked the way it felt, and I liked the way it looked. It was kind of unique, and I just thought, what a great first car, and so I bought the car from him, and I took it in a month or so later to have the oil changed, and only to discover there was no oil in the crankcase at all. The oil crankcase had been filled with STP. It didn't sound like it was knocking, but the motor was shot, and he sold me a car that was completely not good in the motor. And so I thought, oh, wow, this is interesting. And so it cost me actually more to fix the car than it did to buy it in the first place. I drove it for a while. It was a great little car once I had it fixed. And, you know, it's just interesting. About a year and a half later, he moved again, and I was moving again, and we happened to meet, and I was meeting outside an apartment, and he was standing there with a moving truck, and he looked at me and he said, hey, Bill, listen, I'm in trouble. I just got a new job, and I got to move into this apartment today, and I had two guys lined up to help me, and they didn't show, and I'm completely alone. I can't carry the stuff. Would you help me? And I just pondered for a moment. I wonder if I'd forgiven him, and I knew that I had, because I said yes, absolutely. I spent the whole day. He never raised the car, never raised it, and neither did I, because I'd forgiven him. It just didn't matter. But you know what I never did? I never bought another car from him. And probably wouldn't. You see, because it doesn't make us foolish when we give up anger. What it does is it makes us more like godly. And I wish I could tell you every story was like that. I don't like making myself the hero of a story. And I've kind of done that right there. But see, that's what God does for us. God comes in, and it's His grace and His mercy that helps us deal with the things that rob us of the best of God. Let's not let anger be one of those. Let's not let anger be one of those. You see, here's the deal. Anger is not a matter of getting control, nor is it a matter of losing control. What it is a matter of giving up control and surrendering control to God. And when we do that, the God who delights to forgive comes with parental forgiveness and cleanses us from all unrighteousness. Let's pray. So God, we thank you today again. We thank you for the real issues of life, that you actually care about all of them. You talk about this in Scripture. I didn't raise this. You raised it. And so, God, I pray for if there happens to be someone who really struggles with intense anger, I pray, God, you would help them to lean into you and lean on you, that would search you, would want you, would confess and be honest about the anger and ask you to be their help. God, we can be changed. You can change us from the inside out. You can do that. And for all of us who just battle anger from time to time, help us to be wise. Help us to give it to you. And God, help us to never let time be an issue. Let it not go on unduly so that it becomes harbored and a grudge and something that we want revenge for. Don't let that happen in us. Let us be honest with you and let us give that to you at the end of every day. And then, God, teach us to be slow to anger, as your scriptures has declared. And then, God, most of all, teach us to forgive. Teach us to forgive as you forgave. And then, God, keep us close to you so that you control our lives more than we do. And God, thank you for that promise that we can be more like your Son. We ask it in the name of Jesus. Amen.